Hey, clipboard girl, this ain't kindergarten. Go fetch some bandages and let the real medics handle it. That's what they said, loud enough for the wounded to hear. Grace Whitmore didn't flinch. She just tightened the strap on her old leather kit and waited. Just hours later, the blast came. When the explosion hit, they froze. Doctors shouted, medics tripped. 18 soldiers were bleeding out in the dirt, and one nurse, the quiet one they mocked, grabbed her kit and walked straight into the fire. No rank, no permission, just hands that had done this before, and a patch no sniper dared to shoot. Now the real question is, who is Grace Whitmore? And what did war teach her that made even chaos fall silent? The clinic smelled like metal, bleach, and diesel. Not the clean, comforting kind of clinic smell, but the biting, sterile staleness of a place where people bled too often and smiled too little. Outside, the generators groaned beneath the desert sun, and inside, the only thing sharper than the instruments was the tension. Grace Whitmore walked the rows like a ghost with purpose. Her olive scrubs were faded at the shoulders, her name tag scratched and barely legible. She always had her brown leather med kit slung across her body, weathered, worn, and strangely out of place among the newer, shinier gear the younger medics carried. Some thought it was nostalgic. Others joked it was a souvenir from her nursing school days. No one asked where it came from. No one asked her anything, really. "Hey, clipboard girl," someone barked one morning, loud enough for the entire ward to hear. "This ain't kindergarten. Go fetch some bandages and let the real medics handle it." The voice belonged to Corporal Vance, always loud, always chewing gum, always in the mood for an audience. A few chuckles followed. Grace didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap of her med kit, tightened it against her shoulder, and moved on. Her clipboard still clutched to her chest. She didn't defend herself. She didn't reply. She never did. To the others, she was Whitmore the Wanderer, Miss Supply Run, or worse, the janitor nurse. Because if you weren't the one suturing in front of an audience or rattling off field protocols during morning briefings, you were nobody. And Grace had perfected the art of invisibility. She floated between IV poles and supply carts, always knowing what needed restocking, always fixing what others forgot. But they didn't notice. They noticed only when she paused too long or asked a question that sounded too precise. "Stick to samples, Whitmore," Nurse Carla once snapped, manicured nails waving like a warning. "Diagnostics are for the licensed." Grace nodded. She always nodded. But there was something in the way she stood, back straight, chin slightly tilted, as if she'd been in louder rooms than this, under worse lights, with stakes that weren't just charts and code colors, but actual survival. No one cared. The medics laughed harder when she passed. The doctors barely saw her. The patients rarely listened. Once, when she gently approached a young private whose arm was badly bandaged, she asked softly, "May I take a look?" He shook his head. "I'll wait for a real nurse." He didn't know that his tourniquet was loosening. He didn't see how her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, then softened again, unreadable. She left a roll of gauze on the table beside him and walked away. Later, that gauze would be the only thing that kept him from blacking out before the surgeon arrived. But no one remembered that part. The clinic itself didn't help. It wasn't a place made for gentleness or grace. It was a converted shipping bay turned medical ward, gray walls, flickering lights, metal beds that groaned louder than the patients. Soldiers shuffled in and out, some limping, some silent, some holding parts of themselves together with willpower alone. Grace moved among them like a current beneath the noise. She didn't talk unless she had to, didn't laugh unless it was for someone else's comfort, didn't rest unless someone else already had. She'd refill the saline tanks, chart vitals, and clean the trays no one else wanted to touch. She had a way of organizing chaos without ever asking permission, but because she didn't ask for credit either, they let her stay in the background. Once, during a lull, a young medic named Kyle tossed a fake wound at her feet, ripped from a training dummy, dripping with red dye. "Here, Whitmore," he called out. "See if you can handle this one without fainting." The room erupted in laughter. Grace picked it up. She turned it in her hand, examined the coloring like it was an artifact under glass. "Too much dye," she murmured. "Real blood's thicker, warmer." The room went still. Kyle's grin faltered. She placed the wound back on the tray and walked away. They didn't laugh again that day, but moments like that didn't rewrite reputation. Even after she stitched her own palm shut when glass sliced her during an emergency cleanup, threading needle through her skin without flinching, while others scrambled for gloves and gauze, she was still the quiet one. Even when her charting was so meticulous that an outside officer once assumed she was lead triage, only to be corrected with a laugh. Her? Nah, she's just supply rotation. Even when her uniform was the only one spotted in the ward both before and after every shift. They all saw her hands, but no one looked at them closely enough to see what they were capable of. One evening, she paused by the clinic window. The sun was bleeding orange light through a cloud of desert dust. She pulled a photo from the inner pocket of her kit. 6 soldiers stood together in the picture, smiling, half covered in sand. The edges were creased like it had been unfolded and refolded 100 times. Her eyes lingered on the image. Then she folded it once more, placed it back inside, and turned to refill the morphine cabinet. Behind her, someone muttered, "I still don't get why she's here." No one answered, because no one ever asked who Grace Whitmore really was. They just saw a clipboard, and they never asked about the hands that held it. There are moments in a military clinic when the air shifts, not because of sirens, not because of gunshots, but because someone does something so unexpected, so steady, that the entire room forgets how to breathe. This was one of those moments. It was a supply rush. Someone had knocked over a tray of sealed vials, antibiotics, painkillers, 1 glass bottle of adrenaline. The room was loud. Orders were shouted. Boots scraped the metal floor. Someone had slipped in a streak of blood from the last casualty run. Grace Whitmore didn't flinch. She knelt down to clean the mess. Quiet, focused, same as always. Then it happened. A shard from the broken vial caught the underside of her palm, slicing deep. It wasn't just a scrape. It was jagged and fast, and the blood came instantly, hot and thick, dripping onto the floor with small, quiet taps. "Someone get a doc!" Carla shouted from across the room. A few medics moved, but not toward Grace. They paused, waiting for her to react like they'd always expected she would. Like someone too fragile to be here. But Grace didn't cry out, didn't ask for help, didn't even blink. She reached calmly into her kit, pulled out a clean cloth, wrapped her hand tight and sat down. No drama, no hesitation. No, just control. Then as the room watched in silence, she opened the side pocket of her old leather kit and retrieved something no one expected to see: a curved suture needle and surgical thread. She cleaned the skin with antiseptic, unwrapped her palm, and started stitching. Her own hand. The needle passed through the torn flesh with mechanical precision. 1 stitch, 2, 3. The skin pulled together neatly under her fingers. Her face was blank, her breath steady. Blood pooled on the stool below her, but her rhythm never broke. By the 4th stitch, the room was dead quiet. No one moved. Even the overhead lights seemed to buzz softer, as if the clinic itself was holding its breath. Where did she learn that?" someone whispered. No one answered. When Grace tied the final knot and wrapped her hand again, it wasn't applause that followed. It was respect in the form of silence, the kind that clings to walls and lingers long after the moment is over. Later that evening, as if nothing had happened, Grace returned to her supply shelf. Her stitched hand trembled only slightly, barely noticeable, as she restocked morphine and labeled vials. She didn't speak of it, didn't need to. But something in the ward had changed. People moved around her differently now. They still didn't know who she was, but they knew she wasn't what they had assumed, and that unsettled them more than they wanted to admit. 2 days later, during triage prep, a young recruit came in with a puncture wound in his shoulder from a training misfire. It was deep, awkwardly placed, just under the collarbone, angled near a vital artery. Dr. Patel was delayed. Nurse Carla froze, uncertain where to cut or where to clamp. Grace stepped forward. She didn't ask permission. With her bandaged hand, she carefully rotated the soldier's arm, tilting it just enough to release pressure on the clotting. Then she signaled for sterilized clamps, marked 3 points on the skin with iodine, and pressed gauze around the artery to stabilize it. The soldier groaned. Grace whispered, "Breathe. You'll be fine." Carla tried to interject, but stopped when she realized she didn't know the next step. Grace did. The dressing was perfect. The soldier stabilized, not a drop wasted. Still, no one said thank you. But they watched her differently now, not with laughter, but with caution. That night, while reorganizing her kit, Grace paused. She pulled out a small folded piece of cloth from a side pocket. It was wrapped tight, but with the careful wear of something often opened and often mourned. Inside, a photograph. 6 people stood in the frame, sunburned, smiling in dusty gear, dog tags exposed, backs to the wreckage of a collapsed outpost. Grace was at the center, younger but unmistakable. A desert sky stretched behind them. One man held a bloodied IV bag. Another was laughing mid-sentence. There was firelight in their eyes and something else, the weariness of people who had survived something unspeakable. Grace stared at the image for a long time, then folded it back, tucked it into the lining of her kit, and moved on. Later that week, someone caught a glimpse of the patch sewn inside her medkit flap. It didn't say nurse. It didn't say civilian. It said Phantom 04, MedTech clearance unassigned. Previously classified. But no one had the courage to ask. The hands they once mocked now stitched what others feared. And though she spoke softly, her silence spoke louder than their rank ever could. The storage room behind the medical ward was an oven by midday. Dust floated like ghosts in the sunlight that poured through cracks in the siding. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, some labeled, most forgotten. Ethan Cho, barely 22, was a tech specialist sent from Central Logistics. Nervous by nature and always fidgeting with something, he was looking for replacement ECG wires and thermal packs. Instead, he found a rusted metal case shoved behind a row of defunct stretchers. Inside, an old military-issue laptop. The screen was cracked in the corner, and the casing bore an old serial code from a division long since decommissioned. It shouldn't have even been there. But Ethan was curious and bored. And like most young men with security clearance and time to kill, he made the worst decision he could have made. He booted it up. The screen flickered. A dated OS loaded. One folder blinked back at him. Echo Bravo. Blackout records. He hesitated. Clicked. No password. Inside were fragmented video files, grainy, shaky helmet cam footage. Most were static or distorted beyond repair. But one file opened cleanly, and it changed everything. The video began in chaos. Gunfire, screams, radio static layered over the sound of boots hitting gravel. The camera ducked behind sandbags, then swung left as a mortar hit nearby. Dust swallowed the frame, then cleared just enough to reveal a medic dropping to her knees beside a fallen soldier. Her hair was shorter, but unmistakable. Grace Whitmore. Face streaked with sweat and ash. Hands already at work. No hesitation. The soldier's neck was torn open, arterial spray pulsing out. Grace reached for a clamp with one hand and used her other hand to pinch the wound shut. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She leaned close, whispered something into the soldier's ear, then began stitching his carotid arteries shut under enemy fire. Behind her, others shouted. Bullets cracked nearby. A soldier dragged another body across the dirt, yelling for evac. The camera briefly panned left and showed a tactical patch on Grace's vest. Phantom Echo, MedTech 04. The feed cut to black. Ethan didn't move for a moment. Then he backed away slowly, like the laptop might explode. Or worse, summon someone with answers he wasn't ready to hear. He carried the device straight to the nurse's station, heart pounding. Grace wasn't there. She was in the trauma wing, restocking gauze. So he waited. When she returned, he barely looked up, just held the laptop out like it was cursed. Is this you? Grace stared at the cracked screen for a long moment. She didn't smile, didn't panic, didn't ask who showed it to him. You weren't cleared to see that, she said quietly. Then she turned away, like nothing had happened. But something had. Ethan told 2 people. Those 2 told 4 more. By sundown, the entire clinic buzzed like a pressure valve waiting to burst. She was in Phantom Echo? That unit's classified. Wasn't that a Black Ops med battalion? I thought they all died in Syria. She stitched a neck artery in a war zone. That's not just nurse stuff. Some didn't believe it, Carla scoffed. Carla, Probably staged. Anyone can fake footage these days. Dr. Patel laughed it off. Old video doesn't mean she's special. But others fell quiet around her. They watched the way she changed IV bags, how she adjusted patient positioning with one glance, how she spoke only when she had something precise to say. They started noticing how many times she'd stepped in without fanfare, and how many times things only turned out okay because of it. Grace didn't confirm anything. She didn't deny it either. When Ethan nervously approached her the next day, stammering half an apology for snooping, she simply said, "Some files weren't meant to be opened, but now that it is, be careful what you share." Then she handed him a restocked tray and moved on. He never brought it up again, but whispers carried farther than bullets ever could. One morning during briefing, a visiting colonel scanned the room and paused on Grace. "You the one with phantom training?" No one had told him. But someone must have. She looked up slowly. Her voice, as always, was calm. "I was MedTech 4, sir." The colonel blinked, just once, then nodded. Didn't ask for proof, didn't doubt her tone, and that was all it took. After that day, soldiers who used to chuckle when she walked by now made space in the corridor. New medics asked if she could review their tourniquet technique, just in case. And sometimes, when no one was looking, someone would glance at her kit, wondering what else might be inside. Grace said nothing. She didn't need to. The video had already spoken louder than her voice ever had. In the field of combat medicine, experience usually comes with medals, or scars, or records. But Grace Whitmore had something different, a reputation built in silence, revealed by accident, and confirmed by the way her hands never shook. And somewhere in the back of the clinic, that old laptop sat again, screen cracked, lid closed, like a secret waiting to breathe again. It began with a tremor, then a sharp cracking sound, like the earth tearing itself apart. The clinic windows shook, metal trays clattered to the floor. Then, silence, only for a second. Then came the screaming. A patrol convoy had hit a minefield just outside the perimeter. 18 soldiers, no warning, no backup. A plume of smoke curled into the desert sky, dark and thick enough to block the sun. The call came in like a wave of panic. Mass casualty inbound. Field evacuation compromised. Multiple critical. We need boots on the ground. Now! The medical bay burst into chaos. Doctors shouted over each other. Nurses fumbled to grab trauma kits. One medic dropped a stretcher trying to unfold it. Even Dr. Patel, usually smug and unflappable, stood frozen at the edge of the radio console, repeating the same useless sentence. "We need authorization. We're not cleared. This is off base." No one moved, no one volunteered, because no one wanted to be the first to step into hell, except one. Grace Whitmore tightened her bandaged hand around the strap of her medkit. "I'll go," she said. At first, no one heard her. The panic swallowed her voice, so she said it again, this time louder with calm finality. "I'll go." The room turned to look. Carla let out a short laugh. "You're not serious. You're not even—" "I am." Dr. Patel stepped forward, waving his arms. "You're not authorized. This isn't protocol. You're not cleared to operate in the field." Grace met his eyes without flinching. "I don't need permission to stop bleeding," she said. "Send the kid or get out of my way." Outside, the sky was stained with dust and heat. The desert shimmered with smoke and distant echoes of pain. Grace didn't hesitate. She ran. Across the open zone, through the outer gates, over the broken trail. Her boots hit the dirt like she had done this 1,000 times before. Because she had. Not here, but somewhere else. Another war. Another name. Another life. The blast site was chaos. Bodies scattered across the sand. Some moaning, some silent. One soldier was on fire. Another was clawing at the dirt, trying to find a leg that wasn't there anymore. Grace dropped to her knees beside the first man. No pulse. She started CPR. Her motions were clean, deliberate. She didn't even check who was watching. She injected adrenaline into the sternum, kept compressions going. His chest spasmed, then rose. She moved on. A severed artery, a collapsed lung, an open fracture through the femur. Grace moved from one to the next, field dressing, clamping, ventilating, improvising chest seals from tape and gauze. She yelled out supply demands through the comms, sharp and fast. Metaphor on site. I need blood, gauze, airway tube, now. Tell command, field or required, ETA under 8. Every medic still inside the base froze at her voice through the comms. Clear, commanding, surgical. They didn't recognize it, because they'd never heard Grace Whitmore talk like someone who once directed triage under mortar fire. High above, a sniper stationed along the canyon ridge spotted movement. He lifted his scope, trained it toward the smoke, saw a figure kneeling in the blood-stained sand, finger on the trigger, ready to fire, until he saw the patch on her kit. It was old, frayed, but unmistakable. Phantom Echo, MedTech 04. His hand dropped. He whispered into his headset, "Stand down. That's one of ours." Back in the dirt, Grace kept working. A soldier gripped her wrist as she stabilized his leg with a tourniquet. "I thought I was dead," he gasped. "You're not," she replied. "Not today." Another soldier, barely 19, just stared at her as she packed the wound in his abdomen. He didn't say thank you. He just reached out and touched her sleeve, as if to make sure she was real. She was, and she didn't stop. Not when her knees bled through the fabric of her pants. Not when her voice cracked from smoke. Not when the sky turned orange behind the smoke cloud. When the medevac finally arrived, the flight nurse stepped out wide-eyed. "Who triaged this?" Grace handed her a clipboard, covered in blood, soot, and her precise handwriting. "They're stable. Prioritize the unconscious first." The woman took the board, paused. "You're not even in the rotation roster." Grace didn't respond. She turned and walked back toward the base, toward the shadows that didn't know what to do with someone like her. By nightfall, the base was different. People whispered. Voices lowered as she passed. Even Dr. Patel didn't speak when she walked into the trauma bay and restocked her own kit. Because in war, reputation means nothing. But results? Results burn themselves into memory. And 18 soldiers breathing is the kind of result no one forgets. Not even the ones who once mocked her. Especially not them. The next morning, the hallways were quieter. Not because the base had changed overnight, but because something inside it had. The same corridors that once echoed with laughter behind Grace Whitmore's back now echoed with hesitation, with respect, with silence. She walked past the nurse's station. No one called her clipboard girl. No one joked about preschool boo-boos. No one threw dummy wounds at her feet. They just stepped aside. Dr. Patel, ever proud and dismissive, avoided her eyes. He didn't say a word when Grace retrieved 2 trauma charts from his desk, charts he'd forgotten to file. Carla, standing at the supply cabinet, cleared her throat as Grace walked by. "Grace," she started. Her voice was low, uncertain. I owe you an apology." Grace didn't stop walking, but she nodded, just once. That was enough. In the mess hall, people whispered in corners. They'd all heard the comms recording, heard her voice calm and clear as she called out triage orders from a kill zone, heard the medevac crew confirm she'd stabilized every soldier before airlift. Someone had even passed around a blurry photo taken just before the rescue birds landed. Grace crouched low, covered in ash and blood, one hand raised toward a crying private, the other gripping her kit like a weapon. That evening, as the clinic settled into an uneasy quiet, a young soldier named Daniels approached Grace while she refilled morphine in the cold locker. He held something in his hand, small, metallic, and carefully wrapped in cloth. "My brother," he said quietly. "He served in Syria, years ago. Said a medic patched him up when his unit was left behind. Said she didn't speak much, just worked fast." Grace glanced at the object. It was a tarnished medic's commendation pin, one from a mission the Army had buried under the word classified. "He always carried this," Daniel said, voice cracking. "Told me to give it to her if I ever met her." His eyes met hers. "Was that you?" Grace didn't answer, but her hand paused mid-reach. She looked at the pin, then at him. "If it was," she said softly, "I'm glad he made it home." Daniels nodded, swallowing hard. He didn't press her. He just handed her the pin and walked away. The next day, Grace showed up in uniform. Not scrubs, not a borrowed field vest, but her own military fatigues. The nameplate was faded, the rank insignia removed, but stitched above her heart was a patch that hadn't been seen on base in years. Phantom 4, MedTech 04, unassigned. She walked into the commander's office with her request already written. "I'd like reassignment to Forward Operating Zone Delta," she said. "Hot zone," the commander replied, surprised. "Worst hit area on the map right now." Grace nodded. "Exactly." The man looked at her, then at the mission log still stacked beside him. He didn't ask for credentials. He didn't need to. "Request approved," he said, signing the papers. No one objected. No one even questioned it. As Grace walked down the main hall that afternoon, the shift was undeniable. The ones who had once laughed now stood straighter. Some saluted. Some didn't know what to do, so they nodded. Not out of politeness, but out of reverence. Not for rank, not for medals, but for someone who had walked through fire and come back with 18 lives still breathing. "Thank you, Phantom 4, someone whispered as she passed. She didn't turn, but she heard it. Later that night, alone in the clinic, Grace pulled out the old photo once more. 6 soldiers, dust on their faces, laughter frozen in time beneath a desert sky. Her fingers traced each of them slowly. Then she folded the photo, tucked it back in her kit, and zipped it shut. There was still work to do. She didn't come here for applause. She didn't return for redemption. She came because some wounds never make it onto medical charts, and some hands were born to heal through the noise, not above it. Grace Whitmore never asked to be remembered, but from that day forward, every time she walked through the halls, they stood a little taller and whispered her name like a salute. Phantom 4. As the dust settles on Grace Whitmore's story, we're left with more than just admiration. We're left with questions, not just about her, but about ourselves. How many graces have we walked past in our own lives? How many quiet souls have been dismissed because they didn't wear their strength on their sleeve? How often do we equate loudness with leadership and mistake silence for weakness? Grace never raised her voice. She never asked for credit. She didn't fight for recognition. She fought to keep people alive. And maybe that's the most American thing of all, showing up when it matters, even when no one's watching. In today's world, where opinions fly faster than facts and judgment is only a scroll away, it's easy to overlook the ones who simply do the work, the nurses, the janitors, the retired veterans, the folks who hold up communities without hashtags, medals, or press conferences. Grace's story reminds us, honor doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just walks quietly into the fire. Now here's where we pass the mic to you. Have you ever met someone like Grace in real life? Someone overlooked until they changed everything? Maybe a grandmother who held the family together, a neighbor who fixed things without being asked, a veteran who never talked about the medals tucked in a drawer. Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story, and your voice matters. Or maybe you disagree. Maybe you think Grace went too far. Should she have followed the chain of command? Was she right to break protocol to save lives? Let's talk about it. Respectfully, honestly. That's the beauty of these stories. They're not just about the past. They're mirrors for the present. Thank you for being here with us today. If this story moved you or made you think, please consider subscribing to the channel. Give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply listen. And remember, it's not the volume of your voice that defines you. It's what your silence has survived. See you in the next story. And until then, stay steady and stay kind.